At my graduation, my aunt whispered, "She's a dreamer, not a builder, and dreams don't last beyond a lifetime." I smiled politely. 2 generations later, her great-grandchildren attended schools built with endowments funded by my fortune, their scholarships signed in my name, their futures owed to a ghost they would never recognize. I grew up in Paducah, Kentucky. Small town, big mouths. The kind of place where people know your business before you do. I was the first in my family to go to college. Not because we weren't smart, but because we were broke. My dad was a mechanic. My mom cleaned houses. They saved every penny so I could have a better life. I got straight A's. I worked part-time at the diner. I kept my head down. I didn't go to parties. I didn't mess around. I had one goal: get out. So when I got into Stanford with a full ride, it was like a miracle. My parents cried. My teachers hugged me. But not Aunt Dorothy. She smiled that tight-lipped smile she always had, leaned down at my graduation, and whispered so only I could hear, "She's a dreamer, not a builder, and dreams don't last beyond a lifetime." Then she pulled back, looked me in the eye, and gave that fake smile like she hadn't just spit in my face. That moment stuck with me. Not because it hurt, but because it felt like a challenge. She didn't think I'd make it. She thought I'd burn out. That I'd come crawling back after failing out, tail between my legs, begging for a job in her husband's old bank or marrying some local guy and pretending that was enough. I didn't go back. Stanford was hard. Brutal even. I didn't fit in. I was a girl from a town where people still smoked in diners and got married right after high school. I didn't have fancy clothes. I didn't know how to network or talk like the rich kids did. I was terrified most of the time. But I worked. I got up at 4 a.m. and cleaned dorm bathrooms. I worked in the library late at night. I ate ramen and saved every dime from every tutoring gig I could get. I studied like my life depended on it, because it did. When I graduated a year early, with honors, I didn't even tell Aunt Dorothy. I didn't send a card. I didn't call. I knew she wouldn't care. But I remembered her words. I remembered them every single time someone doubted me. When I was broke and sleeping in my car after moving to San Francisco. When I couldn't get funding for my startup. When I got laughed out of rooms by venture capitalists in suits who thought I was too quiet, too plain, too southern. I built my first tech company from a storage unit with a broken heater. No investors. Just code and caffeine. I sold it 3 years later for $14 million. Then I built another. Then another. By the time I turned 45, I had 3 homes, my own investment firm, and a net worth higher than anything Aunt Dorothy's family could have dreamed of. But that wasn't enough. I wanted more. Not for me, but for the kids who'd come after me. Kids who looked like me, sounded like me, had people like Aunt Dorothy in their lives telling them what they couldn't do. So I set up scholarships. Endowments. I donated millions to rebuild schools in Kentucky. Quietly. Anonymously. No press.
Not even cuttings.
But every single scholarship letter sent to a young girl from Paducah, with big dreams and no money, was signed in my name. And here's the twist: 2 generations later. Aunt Dorothy's great-grandchildren? The ones born with all that so-called legacy? They ended up going to schools rebuilt with my money. They got scholarships from my endowments. They sat in classrooms that wouldn't have existed if not for me. They wrote thank you notes to a woman they never met. A woman their great-grandmother dismissed as a dreamer. They didn't know the name on the letter used to scrub toilets to survive. That she once cried herself to sleep in a dorm bathroom. That she'd been told her dreams were worthless. They just knew they were getting a chance. And Aunt Dorothy? She died never knowing the truth. Never realizing that every time her spoiled grandkids bragged about their fancy school, or their full rides, they were bragging about me. Her curse didn't kill my dream. Fed it. She was right. Dreams don't last beyond a lifetime. But legacies do. A few years after I turned 50, I got an email from a local historian in Paducah. He wanted to honor my contributions to the town. Said they'd uncovered my scholarship work and school rebuilds, and wanted to name a new public library after me. First I said no. I didn't want the attention. That wasn't why I did any of this. But then he sent me something that made me pause. He attached an old scanned letter. It was from Aunt Dorothy. A letter she had written to the Paducah Historical Society back in 1987, the same year I left for Stanford. In it, she talked about the dangers of encouraging certain types of ambition in young women. She didn't name me, but she didn't need to. It was obvious. She called me a cautionary tale in the making. I stared at that letter for hours. All these years I thought she was just bitter. But this was more. She had tried to bury me before I even left town. She had written letters behind my back. Probably told people not to support me, not to donate, not to believe in what I could be. And I still made it. I told the historian I'd accept the library naming, but I wanted full creative control. He agreed. So I did something petty. The main reading room, the one with the giant window looking out over the river, got a nameplate. It read, "The Dorothy Chamber, in memory of a voice that could not see the future." I didn't stop there. A year later, I started a mentorship program for young girls in Kentucky, focused on leadership, finance, and entrepreneurship. I paid for travel, room, board, everything. The program was open to everyone, including Dorothy's great-granddaughter, Rachel. Rachel applied. She had no idea who I was, at least not at first. But I recognized her name on the roster. I almost denied her. But then I thought, no. Let her come. Let her see what real building looks like. The first time she saw me at the welcome dinner, she introduced herself with a smile. I shook her hand, nodded, didn't say anything personal. I let her go through the program, let her learn, struggle, grow. She was smart. Too smart, honestly. Like me at her age. Sharp. Quiet. Angry in that way that comes from never being taken seriously. She didn't know who I was. Until the last day. Each year I give a closing speech. I talk about my story. I never name names, but I talk about growing up in a place where ambition was a threat, where some relatives would rather see you fail than rise. That year, I saw her face go pale as I spoke. Her hands shook a little. Afterwards, she came up to me. Quiet. "Was it my great-grandmother?" she asked. I didn't lie. "Yes," I said. "It was." She didn't defend her. She didn't apologize either. She just nodded, stepped back, and said thank you. I knew what she meant. The cycle was broken. But that wasn't the end. 1 month later, I got a letter from Rachel. Inside was something that made my hands shake, a copy of another letter. One Dorothy had written to Rachel before she died. In it, she warned her not to waste time on dreams. That the dreamer in the family had vanished, and it was best not to follow her footsteps. Rachel ended her note with this. "She was wrong. I want to build like you did." I read that line over and over. Then I called my lawyer and told him it was time to change my will. Because revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's a soft echo. A girl in a classroom built from your blood, standing tall with your name behind her. But there was more to come. Because not everyone in Dorothy's family was as open-hearted as Rachel. And some of them, they wanted answers. Or payback. It started with a phone call I wasn't expecting. A man named Charles. He introduced himself as Dorothy's grandson, Rachel's uncle. I barely remembered him. Last I heard, he'd moved to Nashville and was managing rental properties or something like that. "I'd like to talk," he said. "About Rachel. And about what you've been doing to our family's name." I laughed, even though nothing was funny about it. "Your family's name?" I said. "I'm not sure you're in the position to talk about legacy." He didn't laugh. "I'm serious," he said. "You've been turning her against us. Filling her head with garbage." I felt something cold rise in my chest. "I didn't have to turn her against anyone," I said. "Your grandmother did that all on her own." Silence. Then quietly, "She was old school, sure. But you're not a saint either. You think you're helping? You're tearing our family apart." That stuck with me. I wasn't trying to tear anyone apart. I was trying to rebuild what people like Dorothy had tried to destroy. But then came the cease and desist letter. Charles had sent it through a local attorney. It accused me of defamation, of slanderous memorialization, whatever the hell that meant, and of psychological manipulation of Rachel. I should have ignored it. Everyone told me to, but I didn't. Because I knew what this was. This wasn't about legal threats. This was about trying to silence me again. They couldn't stand that I had risen above them, that I had turned quiet revenge into legacy. that their children were being shaped by a woman they thought they buried decades ago. So I called Rachel. She answered on the first ring. "They're trying to shut me up," I said. "I know," she said. "They told me not to talk to you anymore. Said you were dangerous." I waited. She didn't hesitate. "They're wrong," she said. "I'm not staying quiet." What followed was worse than I expected. Charles didn't just want to shame me, he started talking to local reporters, leaking half-truths and family stories with twisted angles. Made it sound like I had some vendetta. Like I was this bitter old woman with a grudge against a kind Southern matriarch. Some papers ran it. Others didn't. But the damage started to show. Donors called me. Board members raised eyebrows. People I thought were allies suddenly grew quiet. I built an empire, yes. But empires have weak spots. And Charles had found mine, my past. My silence. My refusal to name Dorothy publicly before. I had kept my story quiet for decades. Now I had to decide. Speak the truth, all of it, or let the lie swallow everything. I looked at Rachel's letter again. She was wrong. I want to build like you did. If I didn't fight back, what kind of builder would I be? I went quiet for a week. Not because I was scared, but because I needed to think. I'd spent my whole life building things quietly, schools, programs, futures. But I'd never told the whole truth. Not once. I sat in my study and pulled out every letter, every photo, every scrap of memory I had left from Paducah. I found an old yearbook with Dorothy's handwritten message on the inside cover. She'd written it the night of my graduation. "Remember your place, sweet girl. Ambition is a dangerous thing." I scanned it, along with her 1987 letter to the Historical Society. I wrote a piece, a personal essay, no assistants, no ghostwriters. I called it, "The Dangerous Thing I Became." I told everything. How Dorothy had worked behind the scenes to cut off my chances. How she'd written to donors, neighbors, even my high school teachers. How she'd spread lies to try to keep me from leaving Paducah. How she'd smiled through her cruelty. And how that smile had haunted me for decades. I published the essay on the front page of my foundation's website. No press. No ads. Just truth. Within days it went viral. Thousands of young women shared it. Hundreds of small-town girls wrote to me. A few said they'd heard things like Dorothy's words their whole lives. "Too big for your britches. You think you're better than us? Dreams don't last." But the twist? The twist was Charles. He responded publicly. Not with kindness. Not with remorse. He went on a local talk radio show and called me a fame-chasing fraud. Said I had twisted the past for attention. That his grandmother was a pillar of grace, and I was just an angry old spinster who couldn't let go of ancient grudges. It would have ended there except Rachel heard the show. She was sitting with a group of young women from the mentorship program. They were listening to her uncle call me names. She stood up, left the room, and did the one thing no one expected. She went live. On her social media, she told her story. She showed the letter from Dorothy. She showed text messages from Charles, trying to bribe her to distance herself from me. She cried on camera. But she didn't break. "I've been told to sit down and stay quiet," she said. "But I won't. Because if she didn't stay quiet back then, I wouldn't be here now." The next morning, Charles's real estate company lost 2 major investors. 3 board members resigned from his development firm. And I was asked to speak at Stanford's commencement. I almost said no. Too many years, too many ghosts. But I did it. And during that speech, I said something that had been burning in me since the day Dorothy whispered in my ear. She said I was a dreamer, not a builder. That dreams don't last beyond a lifetime. She was right, they don't. But what you build from them, that outlives everything. I stood there, staring out at thousands of faces, and thought of Dorothy. I thought of the house she died in, the same one she inherited, never improved, never left. And I thought about how her great-granddaughter was now running my mentorship program, how her other great-grandson had just been accepted into the university I helped rebuild, and how every scholarship he got had my name on it. That was the revenge. Not hate, not fire, but survival, success, legacy. I wasn't a saint in all this. I stayed silent too long. I let a lie run unchecked. I held on to pain I should have burned down years ago. But I made sure the truth had the last word. And Dorothy? She became what she always feared most. A forgotten voice, whispered about in libraries named after the girl she tried to erase.